The video game as an artistic medium is impossible to define objectively. I've talked about this at length. It's like any other kind of art, or frankly the human experience itself. With that being said, my personal experience has led me to prefer some games to others, and since the channel is turning 2 years old, I figured now would be as good a time as any to elucidate on that. The only stipulation is that I will only be talking about one game per series, which is pretty common from what I understand. Otherwise, I get the feeling that there would be some pretty significant oversaturation on this list concerning some certain heavy-hitter JRPGs. But that's enough introduction. Without further ado, here are my personal top 10 games of... Whoa, Solaire, what are you doing in this video?
Well, it's a top 10 list. Isn't it supposed to have some kind of forced cameo?
Oh, yeah, I guess. See ya?
Bye.
So anyway, here are my personal top 10 games of all time.
No. I detest trickery. But if we ourselves are to suffer deception, our hands are no longer tied.
There's a common joke surrounding me that I hate video games that are fun. And you know what? It's true. I hate every fun video game I've ever played. I vastly prefer games that make me hate myself and being alive, and that's where Pathologic comes in to save me from joy and happiness. That facetious joke aside, Pathologic is a fascinating dialectical experience about the Russian mindset surrounding post-Soviet life in the early 2000s. The game is set in some kind of anachronistic time frame, sure, but the main thrust of the game is definitely about opinions of the Soviet Union, even if they aren't directly posited in that way. The bachelor's dreams of a utopia juxtaposed with the Haru Spex's more down-to-earth desire to simply do what he can to help people in the moment. Then there's whatever the fuck the Changeling's deal is. If only her route were finished. To reflect the dour outlook of the game, it's kind of just completely awful to play. I don't mean this in a bad way, far from it. I find that the core gameplay of Pathologic being almost entirely insufferable adds so much to the experience. It's an oppressive, dour, horrible existence to have no meaningful sense of direction in life. It's something I'm sure many of us can relate to post-high school. What do you even do when one of your country's largest projects comes to an unexpected end? Pathologic doesn't answer that question for you, but it provides you with options. Oh, and I definitely should have talked about this in my Anthology Games video. Oops. I'm not someone who's huge on LSD Dream Emulator. While I can respect what it was going for a ton, it simply doesn't resonate with me as much as most people. There's something about lacking any direction that just makes the game much harder for me to get into. At least contemporary piece which covers the same ground, Yume Nikki has a character to ground me in. Madotsky. LSD Dream Emulator just doesn't have much going on that I personally enjoy. A game inspired by LSD, Fatum Betula, on the other hand, is a really interesting work that presents me with a lot of stuff to work off of. You take the role of someone tasked with the continuation of the universe by watering the central magical tree that controls its fate, the so-called Fatum Betula. It is through each of the outcomes posited by the tree's fate that different philosophical quandaries are explored. Some are terrifying because humanity has become undying. Others are terrifying because humanity has become hyper-violent. And then there's the one with the total ego death of the population by turning everyone into skeletons. It's a twisting dreamscape, a nightmare with no real end. Each time you feed the tree, something terrible happens. Maybe the best answer is simply not to play. The PS1 aesthetics on display are fantastic, even the presentation in general here has sort of become oversaturated in horror spaces in the past few years. There's an eerie, empty feeling to the worlds of Fatum Betula, one that fits the emotions that will consume you after any ending you require. Listless, beautiful, entrancing PS1 spaces. An obscure, recent title that I feel as if everyone should play, and one that I see myself returning to in a few years' time. Something else I am known for, aside from just my hatred of anything fun, is my love of the JRPG, which sounds a bit paradoxical, right? JRPGs are fun in spite of what Nintendo fans will have you believe. And on the subject of fun JRPGs, allow me to introduce you to one of the most fun JRPG series out there, Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest is so often about lighthearted romps through the world as part of a coming-of-age tale. Dragon Quest V is no different. While it's arguably the saddest Dragon Quest game, it's still quite silly and fun. The emotional beats in this Dragon Quest game, though, are what elevated above all the others for me. Sure, the monster catching frankly sucks ass as a core mechanic for a video game to be framed around, but I find it hard to care so much when my character is waking up in the middle of the night with cold feet about his wedding. It's frankly just beautiful and incredibly revelatory. If it had been released stateside in the 90s, I'm certain that it would have been as influential as the SNES Final Fantasy games, if not more. There is really not a whole lot left to say on the matter of Dragon Quest V. It's on par with most of the Dragon Quest series in most respects, which is to say it's pretty good, but it's got some key moments already highlighted that make it shine brighter than all the others for me. One of the few games to genuinely make me feel heartbroken, Nero for life. And I thought the movie was pretty cute too.
This ghost. It lives and speaks.
As it turns out, I really like Super Nintendo RPGs. Well, for the most part. I'm looking at you, Secret of Mana. Ugh. The SNES RPGs I adore all have pretty standard setups for the medium and the time frame. While Final Fantasy IV was pretty revelatory for its usage of actual character melodrama compared to a lot of its contemporaries, the medieval fantasy tropes still shine through, which is not a particularly bad thing, mind you. Final Fantasy IV fucking rocks. It's just that that particular aspect of it isn't super groundbreaking. Or look at the aforementioned Dragon Quest V. Though the overarching story might have had an incredibly unique structure, it's still swords and sorcery. Earthbound is unique, of course, but what about Earthbound isn't? I present you with this long preamble to simply illustrate what makes Live Alive so special on a surface level. Aesthetically speaking, it's a lot more diverse than a lot of RPGs of its time frame, at least out of the popular ones. 7 different chapters containing several different elaborate homages to human art, from the western to the kung fu flick to the JRPG itself. It's simply one of the most inventive experiences that Square has ever put out, and one of their greatest games. Digging deeper beyond that, the way it comments on the Campbellian hero's journey and how we take it for granted within the narrative is extremely fascinating. Hardly ever do we see such metatextual work in video games without them involving the game itself coming to life in some fashion. Although there are some instances of that which I think work, Live Alive's commentary on the hero's journey as narrative, on how heroes aren't always heroes and that their quests are not predetermined and they are not entitled to them, is just fantastic. A game you play for the novelty of the premise and you stick with for the incredible ideas at play here. Simply phenomenal. I just referred to liking a few games where the metatext is incredibly direct insofar as the game comes alive in some capacity. In most games I dislike it. Doki Doki Literature Club and Pony Island are 2 games that I think are incredibly tacky in their usage of these concepts, though the former is far worse than the latter. I think it's the worst part of Everhood because it frankly doesn't contribute much to the main ideas at play there. However, it's certainly at its finest in Undertale, our next object of discussion. I find Undertale's use of metatext to be a little overstated, since the narrative has many other aspects to it that are also incredible that apply more directly to day-to-day life, such as the importance of making connections in spite of how much easier it is to burn bridges, and a cautionary tale about the pursuit of constant growth within the capitalist hegemony without any concern for anything else. However, the reason that Undertale's metatextual ideas are so overstated is simply because they are some of the most fantastic implementations of them in any game and kind of set the standard that others would follow. There's a reason games like Inscription end up feeling incredibly played out. Undertale has done all of these ideas so well, and in ways that are far more interesting too. It was through Undertale's genocide route that the ideas behind the game really came into full force for me. Flowey's speech toward the end of the game put things into perspective. The average gamer does not treat the video game as an artistic experience. It's simply just another load of content to be consumed. You have to engage with everything in the game, right? Otherwise you didn't experience it correctly. That's what brought you to the genocide route in the first place. A morbid need for satisfaction, one that required you to see everything in the game through. It's a hollow way to enjoy games, one that removes any individuality from the experience. Because ultimately you end up doing the same thing as everyone else. Why play games if all you wish to do is consume them in their totality? Why exhaust worlds of all meaning? It's brilliant. Anytime someone criticizes Undertale for quote-unquote chastising the player for wanting to see all the content, it's quite frustrating. Wanting to see all the content in the first place is directly what Undertale talks about. Games are not content farms. They're works of art.
There is nothing. Only warm primordial blackness. Your conscious ferments in it, no larger than a single grain of malt. You don't have to do anything anymore.
Writing is a very important part of a video game to me. I mean, I am a writer. And when I say writing, I don't just mean the plot or the characters, I mean the actual flow of the written text and how it feels to read. There are rhythms and word choices that I appreciate a lot. I adore the new remake translation of Live Live, for instance. The way the words just leap out of the game at me are incredible. But we all know what the best written video game of all time is. What it has to be. Disco Elysium is a game about the malaise that accompanies the society stuck within neoliberalism, yet another game with incredible writing centering around post-Soviet blues. And I'm referring to Pathologic as the other one, by the way. Hello Charlotte does not have amazing writing, and it's frankly a dumpster fire. Anyway, throughout the entire experience, the writing and voice acting are just always incredibly evocative. It's charming but also insightful at every turn, a game with infinite rabbit holes and ideologies it portrays. One of the greatest critiques of neoliberalism and fascism, and even in some regards, communist movements that I've ever seen, in a game that I simply think everyone should play. Also, please don't shave in the mirror, you will regret it. While I find Disco Elysium's dialectical approach to communism extremely fascinating, there's something about a work that's just bluntly what it's about sometimes, you know? Why have nuance? Doesn't that detract from your point? So says Mother 3, a text that I have analyzed to death on this channel, and one that I plan to continue to analyze even more over and over until the end of time. It's a bit facetious of me to say that Mother 3 is totally lacking in nuance. The fact that Tazmily Village itself is not a total paradise in spite of its communist ways is just one indicator of that. Those with disabilities and queer people are still ostracized from their community, and they are incredibly quick to fall to the altar of capital. While some think this is supposed to be some indication of the human condition in capitalist realism, I think it's pretty obviously supposed to just say that Tazmily in particular was kind of doomed from the start, as a lot of historical communist projects were. Under pressure from all sides by capitalist powers that made it so they couldn't build the systems they needed. In the real world, that being the US. In the game, that being Porky and his armies. It's frankly an extremely dour game. But there's something interesting about its dourness, that being, it never lingers in that space for too long. Sure, this may be a game where several major characters die, but it's also a game where a monkey does a silly dance to open a door. And sure, that monkey might be abused and tortured, but there's little present boxes that play different small tunes to you over the course of the game for no reason other than to entertain. The world may end at the end of the game, but the world was beautiful while it existed. It was worth trying to save, even if it couldn't be saved. Above all else, Mother 3 begs us to put our faith in humanity. It shows us its darkest crevices, the torture that it's created, and the systemic violence that we continually construct. But it also shows us how beautiful humans can be, and the good that we can perpetuate. That's not something a lot of games are willing to show both sides of. While many see Mother 3 as a bleak work, I see it as incredibly optimistic. Maybe even to a fault. For a grand majority of my life, due to being an actual child for the majority of my life up until this point, I wrote off theology as a less interesting cultural study and lens of analysis to apply to games. Surely religion could not be that interesting, right? I have my reasons for disliking a lot of religious hierarchies, but I was extremely incorrect about theology. I mean, how else do we get the Buddhist masterpiece that is Majora's Mask? I'm fairly certain that this reading is pretty common by now, and I'm certain that you could figure it out yourself as well. The Buddhist cycle of reincarnation into eventual nirvana highly resembles the arc of Majora's Mask's gameplay. Link is reincarnated into different masked forms, and with each cycle he learns more about the world around him and becomes more spiritually enlightened. His quest culminates in the acquisition of the Fierce Deity's Mask, a transformation mask that allows him to become all-powerful and slay the beast that terrorizes the world, an ultimate display of his spiritual wholeness. But this analogy would be nothing if the actual tasks that you complete in order to achieve this final stage were not inherently spiritually fulfilling or enjoyable, and that's where this game truly shines, in spite of its inevitable demise that you'll watch over and over again. The land is full of characters who are completely distinct and have more interiority than any other Zelda game before and after this one. The Anju and Cafe side quest is the obvious standout, but the Cremia and Romani storyline from the ranch is also worth mentioning to me. There's so much care put into their every interaction, from how she gets cross with you if you wear the cafe mask since she assumes that Anju's mother put you up to proving that she's an adulterer when she isn't, to her drugging Romani before the moon falls with alcoholic milk in order to make sure she doesn't feel the impact as much. It's a gorgeous snapshot of a world full of details you'll keep finding more and more of the more you play it. Nintendo will never make something like this again, and I'm not sure if anyone will. And I didn't even mention how dark it was once. Are you proud of me?
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
It's hard to really talk about Silent Hill 2. It's so beautiful and palpable and cerebral and empathetic. It's the only time I've ever seen a video game swing for the fences and manage to land a home run on everything in it. The way it tackles its subject matter is just phenomenal, and some things that I've had to deal with are portrayed in ways that no other game really understands. I'm not really sure what else to say about Silent Hill 2 right now. It's just incredible. Simply the best thing, which might make you wonder why it isn't number 1. Well, number 1 isn't as indescribable to me, but it has had a profound influence on my life. I get the feeling that most people saw this one coming. Though I've been a bit wishy-washy about what my favorite game is in some of my older videos, mainly the ones from 2021 that I don't really like to think about, Final Fantasy VI has remained my favorite game in my subconscious ever since I first played it when I was 12 years old. And who could really blame me? When you play a game as unique and ambitious as Final Fantasy VI when you're 12, it imprints on you. The oversized cast, the homages to Italian opera, the character interactions, the melodrama. It was all things I had never seen a video game do before. Sure, I had played the Paper Mario games, and at that moment in time I thought Super Paper Mario was the peak of fiction. But it was Final Fantasy VI that truly humbled that worldview. Is it the best game of all time? Of course not. Aside from my philosophical objections to such a title in the first place, it's just an incredibly messy game that has so many issues it's hard to even know where to begin. But is it my messy game, the one that has influenced all of my creative endeavors for my entire life mostly? Absolutely. This has been Arcade Everlasting, saying that it's okay to unabashedly love something. Signing off. Thank you for watching.